We'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for being here to talk about coaching conversations. These conversations are shifting from the way we've done them in the past. Hopefully, they're shifting in the right direction. That's the intent. When we got together and talked about what we wanted to do, the goal really was to make this a lighter process that resulted in a more high-fidelity conversation where feedback was shared. So not so much about checking the boxes, not so much about coming to a rating that really isn't used very often, frankly, but to facilitate a series of conversations where you and your employees get on the same page on what's working well, what's not working well, how we're going to invest in them in terms of their development, and what's kind of coming up, what their goals are in the near term. So with that as the background, that's what we're trying to do. Real quickly, any of you want to venture a guess? And if you've already seen this number, please don't venture the guess. But what percentage of people do you think, and this was a CEB survey for corporations, how many people do you think that performance reviews are an effective use of time? 7? 12. 8.
No, 82.
27. Okay, so we've got 7 to 82 is our range. It is within that range. Luckily, our analytics person guessed it right on the head, so apparently you get the opportunity to choose a better basketball team to cheer for. You won! No, so how many of you think that if it were done well, the result of a performance conversation is beneficial? Okay, so just a couple of you?
More than
8%. Okay, yes, probably more than 8%. A big part of why this number is 8% is because people feel like it either focuses on the wrong thing, it's really lengthy, it is kind of a check-the-box activity where you're just doing something to try to get to a certain outcome, even if that doesn't make sense as two human beings talking about what's working and what's not working. So we are moving away from the one-and-done, once-a-year performance review into a series of conversations. And for those of you who have regular one-on-ones with your employees, what my hope is that this would just take the place of one of your regular conversations with your employees, and frankly, even the subject matter wouldn't be all that different. It's going to be a little bit more focused because there's 4 questions that you have to answer, but it's not some kind of really difficult exercise you have to go through and contort your mind in a lot of different ways to try to make it fit into something. But there's really a conversation that you can talk to your employee about the things that matter to them. So one thing, how many of you have heard before, so this is what we'll cover today. We'll go through the process, kind of what the steps are to prepare for that and the key dates. How many of you have heard of the leadership commandments for endurance? No, okay. So this may be new, this is new to you guys. I'm glad. I think of these as kind of guiding principles for why we're doing this and why these questions actually matter. So the 4 leadership commandments that we have as listed here, and frankly, I think most employee dissatisfaction is caused by a lapse right here in knowing either what's expected of you or measuring the wrong thing that's expected of you. And by the way, I have 2 employees that report to me here, so you guys can totally make fun of me after this about how poorly I deliver on these or not. But
they've already told us.
Yeah, that's why you're all here. So the understanding what is expected of you and what you're going to be measured on, all 4 of these things are really almost like the rights of an employee. You should be able to figure out or have your manager or someone help you understand what does my job and what I do, how does that accrue value to the ultimate goals of this company? Like, what does that look like? Where do I fit in the value chain? And then also, how do I know where I stand? And this is going to change. And you guys as managers, the other thing I want you to think about, each one of you are managers, but you all have bosses as well. So if you're like, oh, this is, as a manager, if you feel like this is cumbersome, which hopefully it's lighter than it used to be, think about it as an employee as well. All of these, every employee should be able to have all these questions answered to them. And if they don't, in a meaningful way, I would posit that they probably are looking for something else, or will be at some point in the near future, if they don't have answers to these questions, or think they have answers to the questions. And then kind of specifically, what's in it for me? How am I going to get to whatever's next for me? So here, sorry, I should have probably had a big reveal, some sort of drum roll, or a curtain that I pulled down. This is it. These are the 4 questions that you need to answer with each one of your employees. And for this particular instance, so the one that will happen over the next couple of weeks, you'll also need to determine a rating, just because everyone has worked this year under that premise. But going forward, it's very likely that it will just be these 4 questions, and exclusively. There's not going to be a choose a rating for people. It's going to be, hey, what are you working on? What are you going to be working on in the next period, in the next 4 or 5 months? What sort of impact have you had? What could you have done even better to improve upon that? And then how are we going to invest in you, and how am I going to help you develop to where you want to get to? It's a different way of thinking about things. I just went through this myself. With my previous employer, we had a very, very long and fabled, whatever the negative fable is, anyway, an infamously fabled performance review system, where it was on a curve, and so so many people got a good rating, so many people got a bad rating, and really you'd have a whole conversation as a manager, you'd prepare for it, spend a bunch of time, and the only thing that the person would walk out of the room thinking about is what their score was. All of the good conversation about what you're doing well, what you need to improve upon, all that kind of just was relegated to minimal importance. So the goal here is to really focus these conversations on these questions and the substance behind them. This right here, for me, is the most important word on the page: impact. It was wonderful to read. I once reviewed an employee's self-assessment that was 23 pages long, typed. 23, and really what it read like was they opened up their calendar for January 1st and went through and said, I did this, 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 and documented the entire year of all the activity they had done. And what I kept asking was, so what? What was important? What did you accomplish? What happened because of all that activity? So if you can get people to focus, instead of on activity, on the impact, and it's a paradigm shift. I have a hard time doing it myself, but it changes the way you think about this conversation. It doesn't become how many hours did you work, how many meetings were you in? It becomes, what did you deliver? What did you change? What is better because of the work that you did during this past period? The other thing that's fun is, instead of this being a once a year process, and hopefully you as managers, hopefully this, again, if this is an extension of kind of the natural one-on-one, it's not a lot of additional work for you, but it's broken down into more bite-size bodies or periods of time. So it's not like, okay, I need to forecast what I'm going to be doing next year in January. Because I guarantee you that at least one change is going to come between now and next January, and maybe more than one change. It's significant change into whatever body of work that each of you have responsibility for. So to be able to focus, to say, okay, over the next 4 or 5 months, what has been the greatest area of impact? Or the next one of these is in July. So as I look back and say, okay, from February to July, what did I do that mattered? What was important? What did I do that went well? And similarly, what did I do that could be better? So a couple of principles on this is don't play old tapes, if that makes sense. Like when you're talking about what they've done well and what they haven't done well, do as good for this time. It's going to be for the year of 2015. In the future, you're going to be thinking about just that period of time. So someone could have an awesome 3 or 4 or 5 months, and then maybe the next time it's not as good, and that's fine. It's not, a lot of times you'll see patterns of behavior if you have star performers, if they generally perform well time after time. But there will be other times when you have employees who have, a project that is just a hugely important project, and they're in the middle of that project, and so their impact may be disproportionate for that period. And we'll talk about how the bonus relates to these questions as well. But they should get a bigger bonus and should get, have a better conversation here. And then, in the future, they may not have that same stage. And so it may be a little bit less. But the other thing I would say is to find some balance between these two. One of my favorite managers that I've worked with, the people, when they moved onto his team, and people absolutely loved working for him eventually. But when they moved onto his team, the first time they'd have a conversation with him like this, it would throw them for a loop, because the superstars it'd be like 50-50 in terms of the documentation. There'd be 50% what could you have done better, and 50% what the great areas of impact were. And most people aren't used to that. If you're really good, you're used to probably getting a whole bunch of really good things, and then maybe someone says something like they work too hard, or anyway, it's nothing of real substance in terms of what they could have done better. So if you as managers can get in the habit of really kind of digging hard, and I know it's harder for great employees to talk about this, but I guarantee you there is stuff that they can do better. They would tell you that. In fact, they will tell you that, because the forum has an opportunity for them to document that as well. But if we as a company can get to the point where we're always talking about both of these, it becomes way easier to tell, when something needs to improve. It's just a natural part of the conversation. It's not some special, oh shoot, I've got to deliver this really hard message. It's, hey, we always talk about what's going well and what's not going well. So it's kind of a cultural shift that we're trying to make here. And then this one, where would you like to develop? I want to be specific here. Not like, I want to get better. Maybe it's, I want to improve my presentation skills, and I will do these 3 things to improve my presentation skills. I'll read this book. I'll find a mentor who's good at presenting, and I will then, look for an opportunity to present and have my manager there to watch me. So let's be specific here. So questions about this page, or comments? What do you guys think? Do you guys like these questions? Are they too broad? Are we missing something? Aaron, do you have something? Okay. Good? Cool. All right. So the other thing for this puts the onus on you guys, because really all we're going to have is answers to these 4 questions. You guys can go about that how you want to as managers, but we want to have those answers to those. Here are some prompts. You guys don't have to answer all these sub-questions here at all. This deck will be sent to you guys. You can use it if you'd like to, and these additional questions may help you as you're preparing for these conversations, but they're just that. They're prompts. Really, the only questions that you have to answer are the ones in the darker blue boxes. Again, because it's up to you, there's some flexibility for managers to do this the way that works best for them and their employees. You can sequence things how you'd like to, but if you think of the form, it looks like this. I don't have any of you guys ever had a really well done performance review? No. Okay, so we got a low bar. That's good. So I will say I will say I've had certain times where I've had a review where we had the sequencing that we had. So this is getting a little bit tactical. With my former employer was we would complete our comments, send them to our managers. They would complete some comments, and then we'd have our meeting. What ended up happening with a lot of managers was these was like the comments the managers made were just a commentary on the employees' comments, which didn't feel super satisfying as an employee. Felt like, okay, if I wanted to hear, about my own comments, I'd go talk in the mirror and have that conversation. But you guys can sequence this however you want to. I would recommend that whatever you do, you don't show up for the meeting for your performance conversation without either of you having prepared a specific set of comments for both of these. So it's totally fine to have a conversation, to tweak those during the course of the conversation, or to, if there's something the employee says and you fundamentally disagree, maybe they'll take that out, maybe they'll leave it in. But that you each come prepared with your own thoughts, because I will say, if you're, and think of yourselves as an employee, if your manager comes in and all they're doing is saying, oh, I agree, that was great. Oh, you could have, on your third point here, I think you could have done it. You don't really feel, going back to the kind of the leadership commandments and knowing where you stand, you don't really feel like you know where you stand, because you're like, that's just my self-assessment. I don't want to just have my self-assessment. So this right here, we will need you to complete this and return it to HR. So if you're support, send it to Amy. If you are sales, send it to Kindy. If you're anyone else, send it to me. For this year, like we said, we'll also complete this. Now, the last time, so we had one of these sessions on Friday. How many of you have looked at this for yourself in the past 10 months? Okay, there's not one hand up. How many of you have any idea where to find this for yourself? Okay, good. Amy and Kindy's hands went up. That's awesome. Thank you. And there's a few other people who raise their hands. So some people know where to find this.
Is it in Atlas? Because I've logged in once in the last year.
Okay. So we are going to complete this. Specifically, this will be the last time, or we anticipate this will be the last time. I'm trying not to ship anything before it's built, but this will be the last time that you actually choose an overall rating for someone, but we will want that for this year. If people started after December 1st, you don't need to go through this process. Okay. You need to go through this right here, but if they started after December 1st, we don't need a ranking. We don't need you to go through and create retroactive goals for the last, unless it's onboard, or get up to speed. So that's kind of the cutoff for that. We still need you to complete one of these, and feel free to add. They're new, if it's light, if there's not a lot of content in there, feel free to add. This person started, January 15th. So really, this is going to be the main thing you talk about. What are your objectives going forward? Okay.
So you said December 1st, but there's going to be people that started in October that don't have these.
Right. And so, anyone who started after February really doesn't have these. If you've been working since February, I would invite you to kind of reconstruct. It doesn't need to be, go through and build, but say, hey, what are the main things that you were trying to do, and how did you do them? But what we don't want is people spending a whole bunch of time trying to reconstruct something that is going to be kind of used for one quick conversation, which is the merit determination for merit increases going forward. So don't spend a whole bunch of time on it. Does that make sense, Scott? Don't spend a whole bunch of time. To the extent possible, if they've started this year, you can identify if they're working on the floor. You can identify, what their key goals are, how they're doing. if you have someone who's totally stunk on some metric, make sure that shows up in here, but don't spend, you don't need to go through the whole goal setting process retroactively to then just grade people on those goals. So in my mind, we are going to capture this. The main thing I'm looking for is this bottom, a selection if they've started after December 1st. And then if they have a set of goals that's already documented, go through and do this. If not, it can be pretty light in terms of saying, hey, these are the main things that they talked about. Frankly, you'll get a lot of that with this question right here. What is the greatest area of impact that they've had? Just use the year of 2015 as the basis for this question, and then you're covered. And you can even put in here, if they have goals, do it. But if not, you can even say, hey, please see question 2 on the